Hi, welcome to Module 3 in the Positive Mindset series, and today we're going to be talking about stress. Remember in the first two episodes, I said we were going to explore a little bit about the nature of the mind and the nature of our own minds. And nothing tells us so much about our unpositive mindsets as the things that stress us out. Rudyard Kipling, the famous writer, said, "More men are killed from overwork than the importance of the world justifies," and I believe he's right about that. Monday mornings between 9 and 9:30 is the most frequent time that individuals have heart attacks, just for example. But also, we tend to get quite stressed about work because that's where we spend 3/4 of our waking time. What is stress anyway? Why do we say I'm stressed? Stress is a general term, like oxygen. So what do we mean when we say stress? Stress is an engineering term that refers to a kind of proportion or relationship between the structure of a building's capacity and the load that the building is supporting. And just like a building, individuals have a structure that we call like a psyche, a perceptual structure. And we have capacity to face life events, varying. Some people are really capable, some people are not. And then we have challenges. We have loads we carry. We vary in our capacity to carry loads. So the question is, how does stress vary from individual to individual? Now, the difference between a building and a human is that a human has a living, ongoing, updating, dynamic system that's assessing all the time what its loads are. And with humans, the loads are not always actual, they are perceived. So there are perceived challenges and perceived capacities. So perception or mindset is a big part of the stress and health equation. So before we talk about coping, we should really understand what it means. Hans Selye is the godfather of stress research, and he was the first one to identify that, when challenging experiences happen, a very specific set of circumstances happens, that the sympathetic nervous system is activated, which sparks the adrenaline glands to produce more adrenaline. Adrenaline is circulated, and that triggers blood flow to major muscle groups, the activation of our heart rate and our breath rate and our blood pressure to get everything churning and burning so we're up and at it to face our challenges, right? The fight or flight response, as we commonly know it. There's a third response, also called the freeze response, which is when an individual goes into shutdown. Some people, for varying reasons, cannot face things frontally and they shut down or withdraw because paralysis has been something like a camouflage for them to stay safe, and so it's a coping tool. But the typical stress response is adrenaline mediated, involves a lot of sympathetic nervous system engagement, and then that sense of like, okay, I'm here to conquer, I'm here to deal with this or whatever. And we combine that with our personality factors and we get unique expressions of what is stressful to us and how we perceive events as stressful and what we can bring to cope with it, our capacities to cope. So let me give you a super quick personality example. A quick personality example of the interiority of how we define things as stressful. One person might be quite conscientious, and if they're quite conscientious, then anything like a client presentation, a business pitch, a public talk, something like that would be enough to make them completely stressed, maybe even faint. A person who's less conscientious would just kind of do it because they had to do it. It might not be great, but it would happen, Then another person might be very shy. So I remember as we went into the social distancing rules of Corona, one of my introverted friends quipped, "Well, now it's your turn." And I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Well, we introverts went with the extroverts to all their parties and functions and networking meetings, and now they have to stay home with us and read books." And I thought that was perfect. Shy people feel very stressed when they go into social situations. Some people are completely phobic even. So what happens? The stomach would be churning, the heart would be racing, maybe the throat would be dry, all these different symptoms. So that's a little bit about the interiority of unique personality styles and how we define stress. But then we also have outer life events. And in the outer life events, Holmes and Ray did some of the most classic research about the most stressful events that one endures in life in general that can happen to anybody. And the most stressful one is the death of a spouse, and the second one is divorce from a spouse. So it's really our love lives, disruptions in our love lives, that end up creating the most difficulty for people. And then there's job loss and financial challenges and all these kinds of very typical things, right? So if you have several of those events in a year, you're 3 times more likely to become ill. So take a look at the illustration as you can see in the little graphic. All right, so I've named for you some interior differences or defining differences and some life event differences as the way we define stress. And the third consideration I want to bring to bear on this is that some stressors are chronic. So one example would be just traffic jams. Ask anyone who lives in LA what it's like to commute to work from any of those canyons, and they will tell you it's long and it's hard. And people get road rage and all kinds of things like that. Road rage is stress. It's a frustration with how things are. And some people are just very driven, literally driven, and goal-oriented, and so the thwarting of their goals really, really gets to them. Some people are very laid back, go with the flow, and wouldn't faze them, and they know it's going to be traffic every day, and that's just how it is. So again, personality differences, but stress can be chronic. Another chronic stressor is the keeping of secrets. If you have to keep a significant part of your identity hidden, you are also likely to become ill. So the most classic example would be the covert of HIV positive homosexuals who were in the closet in the 80s when the AIDS epidemic was first identified. The people who were in the closet were 4 times more likely to become ill than the people who defined themselves as out of the closet. Other secrets include infidelities, health issues, delicate personal things like irritable bowel syndrome or an addiction that one has. Maybe one is taking diet pills or something. So these are all examples of things that people keep secret, and secrets are a stressor on the system. And finally, a chronic stressor can be when one is not in the right place in life, when your belonging is really either wounded or out of date. So you mastered being a mail carrier. The first year you did the job, the second year you kind of slid along. Your 7th year, you can't stand it. That is your life saying move on. All right, so I've given you some examples of how stress occurs in the body, how we are unique in our wiring of capacity and response to stressful events. I've given you some examples of stressful events, and also what chronic stress does and looks like. So in our creative exercise, we're going to do some of our own mapping. how does stress express itself in your body? Where do you notice it first, right? And what do we do about it? So I'm going to bring you back to spirituality as a way to get centered, because once we begin to define ourselves as human beings having a human experience, and that our spirituality can color our life and infuse our life with a joy and a purpose that cannot be rubbed out or dislocated or fired or divorced, then we have a real foundation. So spiritual practice and spiritual commitments and identification of one's authentic values can make us be able to face these challenges. Sometimes we come out on top, sometimes we don't, but the soul endures, the character endures, and our needs endure. All right, that's all for now, and we'll move on to the creative exercise.